The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., April 19th, 2024. I hereby appoint the Honorable Mike Bost to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? God, you are rich in mercy, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. Would that we, as debtors to your immeasurable grace, do likewise. With a great love you have loved us. Would that our hearts, as slaves to your righteousness, be transformed by the immense blessing of your favor. Walking in your spirit, we pray that you would teach us how to be merciful to those who wrong us. Diffuse our tempers, that we would be slow to anger. Inspire us with a passion for your amazing grace plan, that we would be willing agents of your steadfast love in this place, among this body, that our lives would reveal your kindness, a mercy you desire all to receive. In the name of the one who is love, we pray. Amen.
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Everyone, including the guests in the gallery, please join in. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. The gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute of silence and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last week on April the 2nd, the New York Post published an op-ed which explained the proven conservative position of peace through strength. This confirms the world-changing success of promoting and expanding freedom of Senator Barry Goldwater and President Ronald Reagan. Nearly 20 countries now of Central and Eastern Europe, Central Asia are now free because we stood firm and stood up with our allies to defeat the communist threat. And now we're facing, indeed, war criminal Putin, who wants to recreate the Soviet Union. Kudos to Speaker Johnson. Moving Ukraine aid is critical to national security by Daniel Kochis, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. And I'm very grateful that Ambassador Governor Nikki Haley will soon be a valued fellow at the Hudson Institute. Quoting Speaker Mike Johnson's Easter announcement that he will bring a new Ukraine aid package to a vote is welcome news. Sadly, we're in a war we did not choose, between dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. And we need to be standing firm for the borders of Ukraine, for Israel, Taiwan, and the United States. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose? Gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition.
Ask unanimous consent to address the House.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to honor the life, the work, and memory of one of America's most impactful authors, Roberta Roby Harris. Roby, a gifted writer, a fierce advocate for free speech, a treasured friend. An educator at heart, she wrote to answer the questions that children asked her, the questions about how to understand their changing bodies, feelings, and experiences as the world they grew up in. Her award-winning writing treated children with respect and autonomy, covered a wide variety of topics, from engineering and architecture to nutrition and genetics. There are few people in this life who are kindred spirits. Roby was one for me. I am forever grateful for her friendship, humor, and generosity. Her illustrator and dear friend Michael Emberley described her best when he said, "She was a complicated human being in the best sense. She had one of the best attributes you can say about a human being. She was memorable." I will always remember and be inspired by Roby. My heart is with her family as they grieve. Roby's passion for working with children was a shared mission. Her husband, Bill, founded Kids PAC, which advocates for early childhood education. Her sons, David and Ben, have followed in their footsteps, working to address child poverty in this country and psychological needs. Life without Roby will never feel the same again, but through her writing and her continued work and the work of her family, her kind and her generous spirit will always be with us. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose, gentlewoman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For many, today is just another day on the calendar. But for Oklahomans, today marks significance. It was 29 years ago today, April 19th, 1995, that the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was bombed, and 168 Oklahoma lives were lost. I could not be at the ceremony which will occur later this morning back in Oklahoma, so I thought it only fitting that I stand before this body to recognize those who we have mourned over these last 29 years. To the mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, sons, and daughters who never made it home that day, and their loved ones whose lives were changed forever, we will never forget. Oklahomans overcame the tragedy together, forming the Oklahoma Standard through the embodiment of the American spirit. It was through that unity that we found strength. Our community, our state, and our nation will never be the same, but we remain strong. As we mourn the lives lost, we pray for those who have and continue to suffer. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose, gentlewoman from Virgin Islands seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to advocate not only for Virgin Islanders, but for all American families who risk losing access to affordable, high-speed internet. The Affordable Connectivity Program, a key component of President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, has been critical to bridging the digital divide, providing over 23 million households nationwide significant savings on their monthly internet bills. In the Virgin Islands alone, this program benefits over 6,000 households, representing 1 in every 6 homes across our territory. Through this initiative, Virgin Islands families maintain access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. Yet, this crucial lifeline hangs in the balance. To my Republican colleagues, we once again call on you to provide additional funding for the Affordable Connectivity Program. For the sake of our children, our economy, and our future, we must ensure that every household remains connected. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose, the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I'd like to ask make a unanimous request to speak for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
One of the topics going around America today and around this institution is what is wrong with DEI. I bring your attention to an article in the Washington Times last week, earlier this week, in which they pointed out that America's in colleges and universities are sometimes having voluntary, separate graduation ceremonies depending upon race or sex. The only purpose for this is to put it in people's heads that forever they should be divisive and they're not 100% American, but they should always consider themselves Hispanic American or Asian American or what have you. We see the same thing in America's large corporations where our grossly overpaid CEOs are hiring these people to divide people once they go out in the working world. I call upon the regents, the state legislators, the boards of directors to take action and get rid of this occupation in their midst, the sole purpose of which is to permanently divide Americans. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose, the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Reading is powerful. As we celebrate School Library Month, we honor the sanctuaries of knowledge that shape young minds and inspire lifelong learning. School libraries are more than just rooms filled with books. They are gateways to imagination, innovation, and discovery that remain steadfast in their mission to cultivate critical thinking and foster a love for reading. Let us recognize the tireless efforts of those who curate diverse collections, provide invaluable resources, and serve as mentors to our students. As we commemorate School Library Month, let us reaffirm our commitment to supporting these vital institutions. Together, let us ensure that every student has access to the transformative power of knowledge within the walls of a school library. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 1160 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 72, House Resolution 1160. Resolved that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 8034, making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Israel and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 30 minutes of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees, and 2, 1 motion to recommit. Section 2, at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 8035, making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Ukraine and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 30 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The amendment printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the whole. All points of order against such further amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. In the case of sundry further amendments reported from the committee, the question of their adoption shall be put to the House in gross and without division of the question. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 3. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 8036, making emergency supplemental appropriations for assistance for the Indo-Pacific region and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 30 minutes of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. 2. The amendment printed in Part C of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, if offered by the member designated in the report, which shall be in order without intervention of any point of order, shall be considered as read, shall be separately debatable for the time specified in the report. equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. And 3, one motion to recommit. Section 4, at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 8038, to authorize the President to impose certain sanctions with respect to Russia and Iran and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 30 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The amendment printed in Part D of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part E of the report of the Committee on Rules. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such further amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. In the case of sundry further amendments reported from the committee, the question of their adoption shall be put to the House ungrossed and without division of the question. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 5. During consideration of H.R. 8035 and H.R. 8038, the chair may entertain a motion that the committee rise only if offered by the majority leader or his designee. The chair may not entertain a motion to strike out the enacting words of the bill as described in Clause 9 of Rule 18. Section 6A. Upon disposition of the bills specified in subsection D, the House shall be considered to have taken from the Speaker's table the bill, H.R. 815, to amend Title 38, United States Code, to make certain improvements relating to the eligibility of veterans to receive reimbursement for emergency treatment furnished through the Veterans Community Care Program and for other purposes, with the Senate amendment thereto, and to have concurred in the Senate amendment with an amendment inserting the respective texts of all bills specified in subsection D as passed by the House in lieu of the matter proposed to be inserted by the Senate. B, the engrossment of the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 815, the clerk shall, 1, assign appropriate designations to provisions within the engrossment. 2, conform cross-references and provisions for short titles within the engrossment. 3, be authorized to make technical corrections to include corrections in spelling, punctuation, page and line numbering, section numbering, and inserting appropriate headings. And 4, relocate Section 3 in the matter preceding Division A of the text of H.R. 8038 to a new section immediately prior to Division A within the engrossment. C, upon transmission to the Senate of a message that the House has concurred in the Senate amendment to H.R. 815 with an amendment, the bills specified in subsection D that have passed the House shall be laid on the table. D, the bills referred to in subsections A and C are as follows: H.R. 8034, H.R. 8035, H.R. 8036, and H.R. 8038.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Ranking Member McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of the resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I further ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, late last night, the Rules Committee met and reported a rule, House Resolution 1160, providing for consideration of 4 measures. H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act under a closed rule. H.R. 8036, the Indo-Pacific Supplemental Appropriation Act under a structured rule, H.R. 8035, the Ukraine Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024, under a structured rule, and H.R. 8038, the 21st Century Peace Through Strength Act, under a structured rule. The rule further provides that after the House's consideration of these measures, the Senate will be quickly able to put the consideration of the legislation that we passed. Mr. Speaker, today it's important that we support the underlying rule and the underlying legislation. Specifically, I rise in support of our allies after the attack on Israel by Iran 10 days ago. That unprecedented attack has reaffirmed the need for strong American leadership and support for our allies abroad, especially Israel, and now our allies in the Indo-Pacific. I'm well aware there have been concerns in our conference and really on both sides of the House about the southern border and the national debt. As a member from Texas, as a member of the Budget Committee, I fully understand these concerns and I share all of them. But the requirement for America to assert itself as the leader of the free world is not optional. It's not a requirement we can put on pause. Israel has been attacked. China talks menacingly about reunification with Taiwan. Ukraine is in crisis and is in need of our help to survive Russian aggression. Now, I would say to the President, this legislation on the floor today perhaps could have been facilitated by some leadership from the executive branch. But despite the circumstances that brought us here, we stand before the House to support our allies and reaffirm America's leadership on the world stage. H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, will provide much-needed material support to the Jewish state as it faces twin threats from Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran. This includes $4 billion to replenish Israel's Iron Dome and over $1 billion for the Iron Beam defense system. H.R. 8036, the Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024, will work to counter the Chinese Communist Party and create a strong deterrence in the region, while 8035, the Ukraine Supplemental Appropriations Act, will assist Ukraine as they counter Russian aggression. Of the latter, all financial assistance to Ukraine's government is converted into a loan, ensuring that the Ukrainian government is held accountable to the American people. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that our failure in Afghanistan was the spark in the tinderbox that led to the subsequent invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And that conflict had been smoldering for a long time, certainly at least since 2014 in two previous administrations. Had the administration in 2014, as well as the current administration, had more foresight to provide aid and arms to Ukraine before February of 2022, there might have been a different set of circumstances that we were contemplating today, and there might have been a more swift resolution to this conflict with the saving of untold lives. Mr. Speaker, I stand with my colleagues requesting more information from the administration. The American people deserve answers about how previous funding has been used. They deserve answers about what are the long-term goals by the administration to resolve this conflict. I welcome more oversight. I welcome additional information from the administration, and will continue to push its accountability. But today we are at an inflection point, and the longer we wait, the more expensive any solution to this conflict will become, both in terms of dollars and lives. Lack of aid now could cost us much more dearly later, and I don't want that to become a reality, and I would hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle feel the same. I urge passage of the rule, I urge passage of the underlying legislation Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the world is watching. It is time for Congress to act, and act we must. America's allies have been waiting for this Republican majority to get their act together. People are dying in Ukraine. Democracy is on the line in Ukraine, and this Republican majority has been twiddling their thumbs. I'm glad my friends have finally come to realize the gravity of the situation and the urgency of getting this aid to our allies. And what have Republicans done? Nothing. No action to help our allies. It's all delay, distract, deny, and blame Joe Biden. Ukrainians are fighting for democracy, theirs and ours, and they have been set back as a result of Republican extremism. They have suffered because of Republican inaction. I'll remind my friends, Ukrainians didn't choose this war. It chose them. 2 years ago, when Putin illegally crossed the border and invaded, he was banking on the United States and our allies to grow weary. He was hoping we would give up. He was hoping we would do nothing. He was betting we would abandon our friends and our internal divisions would leave us in disarray, at odds with one another. I hope Putin is wrong, Mr. Speaker, because after 2 years of unrelenting war, Ukrainians are still willing to hold the line. I visited Ukraine with former Speaker Pelosi shortly after Putin attacked them. And we learned about the particularly cruel nature in which Putin has been fighting this war. If you care about human rights, you have to care about what's happening in Ukraine. And that's what this is all about. Ukrainians are still ready to defend their democracy, but they cannot continue to do so without our support. And I won't sugarcoat it here. Ukraine's defense of democracy has suffered because there's a faction here in this House, a MAGA minority that doesn't want to compromise. They don't want to take this vote because they're afraid of what the outcome might be. Not that it will fail, but that it will succeed. The argument might hold sway in the Kremlin, Mr. Speaker, but this is the United States, and we are the People's House, an institution designed to reflect the will of the majority. And today, the majority's voice is being heard here on the House floor. Not a majority of one state, one party, or one faction, but a majority that wants to help Ukraine hold the line. A majority that says, bring these bills to the floor for an up or down vote. Democrats are providing the votes necessary to advance this legislation to the floor, because at the end of the day, so much more is at stake here than petty partisanship, brinksmanship. Putin is looking to rebuild the Soviet Union, and mark my words, he will not stop at Ukraine. Anybody who thinks that is delusional. And if the world doesn't help them defend their democracy, this war will not end. It will grow. Look, Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with everything in this package. I have deep, deep problems about the unconditioned aid to Israel. I was among the first calling for a ceasefire, and I still call for a ceasefire. I've demanded more humanitarian aid for civilians in Gaza, and I will continue to do so. I've called for a two-state solution. I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is putting Israel on a path that, quite frankly, undermines his own country's security. And I'm outraged by his cruelty and his inhumanity toward the people of Gaza and the West Bank. There's no justification for that. There's none. Israel has a right to defend itself. Nobody questions that. But what is happening now, I believe, is outrageous and unconscionable. But we will have separate debates, and we will have separate votes on all of these bills. And people can decide where they want to be. And quite frankly, some Republicans wanted a different path. They wanted to extort this rule for a campaign ad on border security for Donald Trump. We almost had no Ukraine aid because that's what some of my Republican friends wanted and advocated for. And they advocated for a bill with no humanitarian aid for anybody who is suffering, not just in Gaza, but also in Ukraine and in other parts of the world. And they wanted all this kind of ugly border security language attached to this measure. Look, there's a lot at stake at this moment. And we're all supposed to be grown-ups. We should act like it. Let's proceed in a way that allows everyone to vote their conscience. And with that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, Mr. Cole from Oklahoma, for 4 minutes.
For 4 minutes. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my very good friend from Texas, my classmate, my colleague when I served on the Rules Committee, and now I'm very proud to say our very distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee. Today's rule makes in order a series of 3 critical security supplemental bills, Mr. Speaker, paired with a 4th bill covering other high-priority national security matters. Collectively, these bills represent the commitment to move much-needed security assistance funding for America's friends and partners. Mr. Speaker, the members of the Rules Committee faced a serious challenge in putting together today's resolution, but they met that challenge in admirable bipartisan fashion. I can't tell you how proud I am of both sides of the aisle, including my friend, the distinguished ranking member, for the manner in which they responded to this particular difficulty. Today's rule creates a full and fair process for floor consideration of these measures. It grants ample debate time on these bills and makes in order a series of amendments, ensuring that the entire body has the opportunity to work its will and make our voices heard. It ensures that members have a full 72 hours to review these bills before the vote. After all, taking up this matter, a matter as important as this, both members of Congress and the American people deserve no less. Finally, it provides an up or down vote on each of these bills. Importantly, this rule allows every member to vote his or her conscience on every issue. Thanks to this process, the House will be able to work its will. That's the way the founders intended this institution to work. Speaker Johnson's work in setting this process in motion has been admirable, and we all owe him our thanks for ensuring both that the House takes up these critical funding measures and that each member can vote his or her conscience on every single issue. Mr. Speaker, the need for this funding is not hypothetical. Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan are on the front lines of the struggle to preserve democracy and freedom around the world. In the case of Ukraine and Israel, these 2 nations are quite literally in harm's way. Ukraine is entering the 3rd year of their struggle against Vladimir Putin's unjust and illegal invasion. Its continued ability to resist hangs in the balance dependent on foreign aid. Its people need the weapons and ammunition provided in this bill to keep them in the fight. Israel, meanwhile, is involved in a life and death struggle against the perpetrators of the October 7th terror attack, Hamas. Over the weekend, Hamas backer and the Iranian regime launched an unprecedented and direct aerial assault on Israel. That attack has been thwarted, and an appropriate response is underway. And Taiwan faces ongoing threats from the Chinese Communist Party, which continues to threaten Taiwan's right of self-determination. Around the world, the United States and our partners are confronting a tinderbox of uninvited aggression on multiple fronts. America must stand firmly on the side of freedom. Peace through strength cannot be delivered through appeasement. Taken together, these measures protect our friends and partners and replenish America's stockpile of ammunition, weapons, and supplies. This is not only about safeguarding our ideals of democracy and peace, but it's central to our own national security. I would encourage all members to vote to support the rule and the underlying legislation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
I'll reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, champion for human rights, Mr. Doggett.
How many minutes? The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Those who committed atrocities against Israelis on October 7th were not martyrs. They were murderers and rapists. But neither were those murderers children. And the children of Gaza have paid an incredible cost for Netanyahu's massive assault. His policies have shown conscious indifference to children, to journalists, to humanitarian aid workers, to civilians in general. I believe strongly in Israel's right to self-defense, but that does not require dropping hundreds of 200-pound non-precision dumb bombs in densely populated areas. Nor does it require laying a medieval-type siege denying water, food, and medicine, using famine as a weapon. Nor does it require killing not only World Central Kitchen aid workers, but so many others. This rule gives us a proper opportunity to finally, belatedly, vote to help desperate Ukraine from Putin's war crimes and offensive, without voting to support Netanyahu. But the rule, I believe, improperly rejected amendments that would have permitted a vote in support of Israel's right to self-defense, without embracing Netanyahu's wrongful policies, which are killing the innocent, sacrificing the hostages, and endangering Israel's long-term security. Sending more offensive weapons to Netanyahu while begging him not to use them simply does not protect Rafah and others from an assault. I would vote to defend Israel, but do not want to be complicit in providing weapons for an assault on Rafah that will cause thousands of deaths and likely lead to a wider and tragic war. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, now I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to a valuable member of the Committee on Rules, Mr. Massey of Kentucky.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 2 minutes.
I truly thank the chairman for yielding me time because he knows I'm slightly opposed to the rule, so he's very gracious. I'm concerned that the speaker's cut a deal with the Democrats to fund foreign wars rather than to secure our border. But what I want to talk about today is process. The bill that will come out of the House after all of this is a bill that began as H.R. 815 to expand the eligibility for veterans to receive reimbursements for their emergency care. How did a bill that was intended for veterans that came out of the House become a bill that may bring us to the brink of war at least 3 places on the globe by sending $100 billion to military contractors? Well, it started in the House and then the Senate took it and stripped every word from the bill. Why did they do this? Were they trying to get around the origination clause in the Constitution? Were they trying to shortcut some process? It's one of those things. But what we've got now is a collection of bills, and I do appreciate that we get individual votes on 4 of these bills, but they include $100 billion. They don't include securing our border. They include a bill called the Repo Act, which could call into question the value of our Treasury bills when we go out to auction those next, if we are going to confiscate Treasury bills that we sold to other countries. It also includes a bill that allows the president to ban websites based on his discretion. I'm concerned about that. This bill, H.R. 815, started as a veterans bill, went to the Senate, got gutted, became the foreign aid package bill. Now here in the House, we're going to vote on 4 separate titles, but we're going to package them back as amendments to that H.R. 815. So we're actually going to send it back to the Senate as the bill they sent to us, which is the gutted veterans bill. I know this is all confusing, but why is this all being done this way? Some will say to force the Senate's hand, but really what it's going to do is jam the Senate, the conservatives in the Senate who would like to have a more fulsome debate. And with that, I am opposed to the rule, and I thank the chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves.
Hey, Tom.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from New Mexico, a valued member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
The gentlewoman from New Mexico is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, today, after months of delay that cost the loss of the Ukrainian military advantage, that cost children's lives and access to food and aid, that allowed China to threaten the Indo-Pacific, Congress will finally vote. Congress is finally going to vote to fund the fight against the tyranny of Russia, Iran, and China, the fight for democracy and peace. Why did it take us this long? Yesterday in Rules, the Republican chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee noted that every Republican president since the Soviet Union era has stood on the right side of history and stood up to Russia. Presidents from Eisenhower to Reagan to Bush, Sr. and Jr., they all knew that Russia's desire to reassert its empire by bombing and invading its neighbor also harms America and American interests. Every Republican president, that is, until Donald Trump. In contrast to every president before him, Trump praised Putin, tried to do business in Russia, allowed Putin to gain the upper hand, and eventually denied Ukraine military aid Congress had approved unless Ukraine gave him dirt on Biden. Donald Trump became the Pied Piper for Putin. Some of Trump's most ardent followers in this House became Putin-protecting Republicans and denied the members of Congress this vote. Until now. Now is the moment. History has its eyes on this chamber as Democrats and Republicans stand up and stand together for what we love, democracy. Democracy is the very reason we get to sit here together today and debate in the People's House. Democracy is the best answer to tyranny, aggression, and depravity. It is our shared bipartisan love for democracy that best unites us with our allies around the world. Allies that are once again united in our fight against Iran, China, and Russia, thanks to the leadership of President Biden, who repaired the damage Trump inflicted on our international relationships. I hope that shared love of a world where democracy is defended will also unite us in this chamber. I remind my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, that bipartisanship is a good thing. It's how America expects us to govern, and it is how we move one step closer to defeating the cruel regimes that seek to take the world backward. I yield back.
Yields back. Reserved. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Texas, another valuable member of the Rules Committee, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Texas recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my distinguished colleague from Texas, and I very much appreciate his service, and I apologize that I'm here on the floor in opposition to a rule in his first week as the Rules Committee chairman. I have great respect for him. And the gentlelady was just essentially implying that for some reason this is somehow Donald Trump's fault. Ukraine was invaded by Russia under the watch of this president. That's the truth, and this incompetent president has led to the situation that we sit in right now, and people are dying in Ukraine, yes. But the problem is they're being funded with American debt. There is no skin in the game for the American people. We're not talking about tax increases. We're not doing anything to say that we're going to pay for this stuff as we rack up $1 trillion of debt every 3 months. But the truth is, Americans are dying, not just Ukrainians, at the hands of wide open borders, while literal hostiles flood into our country. Fentanyl pours into our streets. People are chanting death to America. And the response by Republicans is to pass a $1.7 trillion cap-busting spending bills under suspension of the rules, handing the keys to the NSA and Intel to continue spying on Americans, and now we're on the floor under a rule to give another $100 billion to fund war, unpaid for, with zero border security. Under a rule which Republicans should oppose because it is a process pre-designed to achieve the desired predetermined outcome, with no border security. The individual votes on Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, and a sweetener bill for TikTok are belied by the fact they are being packaged together as an amendment to the Senate Pass Foreign Aid bill. This was all pre-cooked. It's why President Biden and Chuck Schumer are praising it. The problem is there were 9 amendments handpicked by leadership in order, despite 300 amendments having been filed. Speaker Johnson said in January, if President Biden wants a supplemental spending bill focused on national security, it better begin with defending America's national security. We want to get the border closed and secured first. To that, I say amen. And where is that, Speaker Johnson? I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves.
I'll reserve.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Wow, Mr. Speaker. I guess the gentleman from Texas is unaware of the fact that there was a bipartisan border security deal that was agreed to that unfortunately House Republicans and Trump decided to kill. And I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an Axios article entitled "Trump House Republicans Plot to Kill Border Deal."
Objection.
I reserve my time.
Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, of Financial Services Committee, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 2 minutes.
3 minutes. 3 minutes.
It's for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, while I rise in support of the rule, and I thank Chairman Burgess for his leadership on giving members the opportunity to vote on these packages, I also rise to express my profound disappointment that the Biden administration and Democrats in this chamber have blocked from being ruled in order my amendment to cut off a blank check to Russia's war machine. President Biden, the U.S. Treasury Department, and congressional Democrats are so concerned about my amendment that they have prevented it from even being considered or debated before this body. Last October, the Biden administration renewed General License 8, which authorizes certain energy-related transactions involving Russian financial institutions. This license has now been renewed 8 times since the start of Russia's full-scale unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, and it continues to undermine measures designed to curtail Russia's energy revenues. This license, which is the architecture of the Biden foreign policy on Ukraine, has become a lifeline for Vladimir Putin. It is the symbol of President Biden's weakness on Russia, the primary avenue through which he is financing Russia's war machine. And it is the most prominent example of how the Biden administration's radical climate agenda has collided with its stated policy to counter Russian aggression. And it shows how the Biden administration's climate policy conflicts with our national security. Coincidentally, the current general license is set to expire on May 1st. My very timely amendment would prevent this renewal and would erode the energy profits that are refilling Putin's coffers and funding his war in Ukraine. The sanctions put in place by the Biden administration on Russia's energy sector, a principal source of revenue for the Kremlin, have been wholly inadequate. Russia's oil and gas revenues have been rising, and countries like India and China have been buying Russian oil well above the price cap put in place. Enforcement of the price cap has been poor, which has enabled Russia to find non-G7 insurers and ships for the transport of its seaborne crude much more quickly than anticipated. The ease with which Russia has been able to evade the price cap calls into question the efficacy and enforceability of the price cap. Moreover, another renewal of the general license next month would completely ignore the efforts Europe has finally made to diversify its energy supplies and reverse its dangerous pre-war reliance on Russian energy. General License 8 originally reflected the need to give countries that were dependent on Russian energy sufficient time to diversify their energy resources. But many of those countries have now effectively diversified their energy suppliers. Continued issuance of an overly broad general license in this instance threatens to repeat the mistakes made in relation to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, where the Biden administration's refusal to implement strong sanctions against the pipeline not only removed deterrence before the full-scale invasion.
The gentleman, additional minute.
The gentleman is yielded an extra minute.
Thank you. The Biden administration's refusal to implement strong sanctions against the pipeline not only removed deterrence before the full-scale invasion and invited Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but also allowed parts of Europe's dangerous reliance on Russian energy to continue until Putin's tanks had already rolled across Ukraine's borders. Rescinding the license would encourage our allies' efforts to rid themselves of reliance on Russian energy sources. It makes no sense to fund a needed resistance against Russia's unprovoked war against Ukraine while also allowing Russia to fill its war machine coffers through its sale of energy to the rest of the world. Biden can't have his cake and eat it too. It's just ridiculous. He cannot pursue a radical anti-fossil energy climate crusade at home and hope to keep energy prices low. Similarly, he can't keep the flow of Russian crude on the world markets to bolster global supply while reducing Moscow's revenues through an unenforceable price cap. The only way to truly punish Moscow and deprive Putin of the financial support he needs to materially to prosecute the war is by removing the general license on the energy-related transactions facilitated by sanctioned Russian banks. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, but I want the American people to understand the weakness that the Biden administration is showing towards Russia. With that, I yield.
I'll reserve. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Michigan. Massachusetts is recognized.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I would just ask if the gentleman from Massachusetts has additional speakers. If not, I'm prepared to close.
We're prepared to close.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remaining time.
The gentleman is recognized.
So, Mr. Speaker, Democrats have had to make some tough decisions about how to vote on this rule. And let me tell you why I voted to support it last night. I have disagreements with many aspects of the various pieces of legislation that will come before us. And there are some of these pieces that I will vote against. But again, there will be separate votes and there'll be separate debates. But as we learned last night in the Rules Committee, the alternative that some of my Republican friends were pushing to this approach was an Israel-only package, with no humanitarian aid, not just for the people of Gaza, but for any suffering people that the aid would benefit, and some really ugly border provisions, which I found unconscionable, and some other bad stuff as well. Democrats, once again, will be the adults in the room. And I'm so glad Republicans finally realize the gravity of this situation and the urgency with which we must act. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? You don't get an award around here for simply doing your damn job. President Biden told us last year, 6 months ago, over 6 months ago, that this was urgent and important, that Ukraine needed us, that Putin was not going to stop, that the war against the Ukrainians was particularly vicious. Every major human rights organization in the world has told us the impact of Russia's attack against Ukraine. The Senate voted months ago. The Senate can barely agree on what to have for lunch, and they voted months ago. And what did the House do? What did my House Republican friends do? Nothing. No action to help our allies. It's all delay, distract, deny, and blame Joe Biden. Now, I would just say to my colleagues, look at what MAGA extremism has gotten you. Nothing. Nothing. Not a damn thing. In fact, it has empowered Democrats at every critical juncture in this Congress. It has been Democrats who have been the ones to stand up for our country and do the right thing for the American people. Democrats ensured the U.S. didn't default on its debt last year, in case anybody forgot. Democrats supplied the votes to keep the government running in September of last year, in November of last year, and in March of this year. Democrats supplied the votes to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. Democrats supplied the votes for the tax relief bill that passed earlier this year. Democrats have done the job that Republicans have refused to do. And again, we have different priorities, and I think based on what I've heard in this last Congress, different values. And we don't even agree on a lot of what has come before the full House. But Democrats have done the job that Republicans have refused to do. And we don't want an award for it. We don't want a trophy for showing up to work. All we want is for Republicans to do their job, stop blaming Joe Biden for their own incompetence, and work with our side to find common ground. We are in a divided government. A Democrat is president, a democratically controlled Senate, and we have a narrow Republican majority here in the House. Nobody's going to get everything they want. We have to work together. We have to compromise. And I hope today's vote loosens the grip that MAGA extremism has on this body, and especially when it comes to supporting our allies. You know, the Rules Committee is the committee that has been known as the traffic cop of Congress. Every bill of consequence comes through the Rules Committee. I mean, we set the bills, for debate, set the bills for debate on the House floor. The last bill that the Rules Committee reported that actually became law was almost 10 months ago. All the other bills that we have sent that have been over to the White House, Senate and the White House to become law, it had to be brought up under different processes and procedures. I mean, let that sink in. Something's not working here. And you either want to be a body that is constructive and that gets stuff done, or you just want to be, a party that just obstructs everything and gets nothing done. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing to show for all the yelling and screaming and finger pointing that we see on a regular basis on this House floor. My friends have to choose. History's going to judge them by how they answer one simple question. Are they going to work together with Democrats and, in this case, stand with our allies and stand for America? Or are they going to throw in their lot with MAGA, Trump, and Putin? We are living in very uncertain times, Mr. Speaker, and people around the world are counting on this country to stand up and lead. People in Ukraine, people in Taiwan, people in Gaza, people in Israel. The eyes of the world are on this body. There's a lot of things in this package I disagree with. And in my opening statement, I talked about my concern about the unconditioned aid package to Israel, which and my concern that Netanyahu's government is not moving in a direction that, quite frankly, is a direction that I think will lead to more security for Israel, but exactly the opposite. I worry that what he is doing is, quite frankly, a violation of the human rights of so many innocent people in Gaza and in the West Bank. I was hoping that they would pursue a different pathway, and instead we now hear that he wants to go into Rafah. There's a famine happening in Gaza. People are starving to death. Aid is being frustrated from getting there. Food, medicine, important supplies. People are dying. Surely we should all care about that. We should be able to advocate for Israel's security, but also advocate for the people of Gaza, children of Gaza, senior citizens, people who are just trying to get on with their lives. But notwithstanding that, notwithstanding the fact that we may have disagreed, and some of my Republican friends obviously disagree that we ought to be, whether we should be helping Ukraine or not. I disagree with you. Fine, but that we have a process that you will be able to vote on all of these things separately, and you'll be able to make your views clear. But I got to tell you, you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something, and we ought to agree that these issues are important enough to debate and to have up or down votes on. The people who are advocating that we do nothing, or that we attach things to this bill that will guarantee that it goes nowhere in the Senate, and therefore we help nobody. I don't understand why you're even here, quite frankly. We need to move this process forward. The House has to function. And as we've seen under Republican control, that only happens when Democrats are the adults in the room. And I say that not to be partisan. I say that because that's what's been happening. I gave you a list of things that needed to be done, not just in terms of helping our allies, but in terms of saving our economy, that could not have been done unless Democrats stood up and behaved like adults. And This should have been dealt with a long time ago, months ago. But here we are. Here we are. And so I hope that we proceed, that we have rational and thoughtful debate, knowing that we will have disagreements and knowing that some of us will have different ideas on how we should proceed forward. But this is the United States House of Representatives. We are supposed to debate issues. We are supposed to vote on things. And unfortunately, this has become a place where trivial issues get debated passionately and important ones not at all. Well, these are important issues that are in this bill. Again, some of them I agree with, some of them I don't agree with. But let's debate them, let's vote on them, and then let's move on. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will yield myself the balance of our time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, our adversaries, notably Russia, China, Iran, are watching to see how we will respond. Our reaction to these crises will determine how they will choose to proceed. An important difference between this package of bills today and the previously passed Senate supplemental is the addition of the 21st Century Peace Through Strength Act. Legislation is important as it includes sanctions and policies that counter our adversaries through the inclusion of the Repo Act and the removal of our payment for foreign pensions and requiring the administration to provide a game plan in Ukraine, something that many of us have been asking for some time. Ronald Reagan told us peace comes through strength. By failing to act now, it will signal the opposite of strength, and it will invite future aggression, as failure to act has done so often in the past. Mr. Speaker, I also feel obligated to point out that this Congress has had 2 votes on providing aid to Israel. One that occurred in October, right after Speaker Johnson was elected. Indeed, it was one of his highest priorities. And I thought responsibly that aid package was offset through cuts to other federal agencies here. Senator Schumer didn't see it that way and said, we've never conditioned aid to Israel with anything, so it has to be no offset, can't be paid for. So the House, in February of this year, I think it was Mr. Calvert of California who had a bill to provide the same aid to Israel without the offset. And it was blocked. Blocked this time by people on my side. So the Speaker said, okay, let's bring it up under suspension. Maybe we can get agreement between members on both sides, but in fact, under suspension, the 2/3 majority required was not achieved. So that bill failed in February as well. Had any one of those bills passed, we might not be here today, because we all know a week, 10 days ago, Iran attacked Israel, missiles and drones originating from Iranian soil, first time that's ever happened, and the crisis advanced. Yes, we did have an opportunity to provide that aid to Israel. Might not have been what my friend from Massachusetts would have wanted, but at the same time, we had the opportunity to provide that. And unfortunately, now even members of my committee are upset with where we are today, but we had the opportunity to sort of head off all of this problem by simply passing that aid package last February, and we wouldn't do it. So what happens if we don't do this today? Does it get better or worse for us down the road? Nobody knows the answer to that, but history tells us it is very likely to get worse. So we got 2 votes now, Mr. Speaker. Israel aid, and on both counts, I think most of us in this body want to see that pass. I will stress again that weakness invites aggression. And we cannot allow our allies in the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific and the Ukraine to be abandoned. By doing so, we will not prevent future aggression, but we will invite it. Today, we have an opportunity to deliver critical aid to our allies, and I believe it's appropriate to do so. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time. I move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentleman yield back. With objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adopting the resolution. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion chair, the ayes have it. The resolution.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose, gentleman from Texas, Seeker?
I would ask for a recorded vote.
Or does the gentleman ask for the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question is postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess subject to the call of the Chair.
Be in order. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on ordering the previous question on House Resolution. Is on adoption of House Resolution 1160, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 72, House Resolution 1160, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 8034, making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Israel and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 8035, making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Ukraine and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 8036, making emergency supplemental appropriations for assistance for the Indo-Pacific region and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes, providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 8038 to authorize the President to impose certain sanctions with respect to Russia and Iran, and for other purposes, and providing for the concurrence by the House in the Senate amendment to H.R. 815 with an amendment.
The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
members voted? Do any members wish to change their vote? all members voted. Does any member wish to change their vote?
On this vote, the yeas are 311 and the nays are 93. The yeas are 316, the nays are 94. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members are asked to take their conversations off the floor. House will be in order. This doesn't seem to be quite as firm. Please remove your conversations from the floor and please clear the well. The chair lays before the House an enrolled resolution.
House Joint Resolution 98, Joint Resolution providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the National Labor Relations Board relating to standard for determining joint employer status.
The House will be in order. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered or votes objected to under Clause 6 of Rule 20. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 3602 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3602, a bill to prohibit the intentional hindering of immigration, border, and customs controls and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama. This will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor.
Mr. Speaker,
the House will be in order. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to insert extraneous material on H.R. 3602.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, President Trump secured our borders. Then just over 3 years ago, Joe Biden took the office of president and immediately did exactly what he had promised on the campaign trail to do.
The House is not in order. Please take your conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. Gentleman is recognized.
Joe Biden took to the office of president and immediately did exactly what he had promised on the campaign trail to do. He reversed the Trump administration's immigration policies. By doing so, the new president let the world know that America's borders are open. President Biden rescinded the Remain in Mexico policy, prevented the removal of illegal aliens, and blocked immigration and customs enforcement and Customs and Border Protection from enforcing immigration laws. In the weeks and months that followed, President Biden terminated the Trump-era policies aimed at preventing fraudulent asylum claims, ending catch and release, increasing criminal alien removals, and preventing illegal immigration. And we're still in the midst of the Biden administration's extended result, the biggest mass illegal immigration in the history of the United States. More than 7.6 million illegal aliens have been encountered by CBP on the southwest border. There have been 38 straight months with more than 100,000 southwest border CBP encounters. The Biden administration has released nearly 4.7 million illegal aliens into America's communities, in addition to at least 1.8 million known gotaways avoiding apprehension. At least 357 illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list have been encountered by the Border Patrol along the southwest border. No doubt more have evaded detection. And all of this is just on the southwest border. Our northern border is also seeing record high numbers of illegal aliens encountered by CBP. Early last year, House Republicans acted to secure our border. We passed H.R. 2 to secure the Border Act, to end the abuse of U.S. immigration system whether by the administration's cartels or the illegal aliens themselves. Had Senate Democrat leadership not refocused or refused to debate H.R. 2 on the Senate floor for more than 330 days, perhaps we would not still have a mass lawlessness on our border. In the meantime, we keep reading media reports that President Biden is looking to use his executive authority to quell the border chaos. But each time, the open borders advocates tell Joe Biden not to use that authority, and each time he bends to their wishes. Americans are outraged that our own federal government turns a blind eye to the chaos that has been created. Americans are tired of seeing mobs of illegal aliens beating up New York police officers, watching endless numbers of illegal aliens stream across the southwest border, and hearing the heart-wrenching details of the deaths of innocent young men and women, including a U.S. Senate staffer, caused by illegal aliens who should not have been here in the first place. So today, House Republicans are trying again to make our Democrat colleagues and President Biden take this border crisis seriously. H.R. 3602 will restore successful Trump-era policies and remove the rewards and incentives the Democrats have used to entice people to violate our own nation's sovereignty. Division A includes provisions in the Homeland Security Committee's jurisdiction that help secure our border. For instance, it includes provisions to require border wall construction, to increase the number of Border Patrol agents and provide them with bonus pay, and to deploy additional technology to that border. Division B includes provisions in the jurisdiction of the Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Title I reforms the asylum process to deter fraudulent asylum claims from aliens, including economic migrants, and ensures that aliens granted asylum are truly being persecuted by their existing government. Title II.
Please take your conversations off the floor. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Title II ends the Biden administration's catch and release policies by clarifying that the DHS Secretary must remove and detain illegal aliens who arrive at the border or place them into remain in Mexico type programs. There are no other options. The aliens cannot be paroled or otherwise released into the U.S. unless an immigration judge grants that alien asylum or some other immigration benefit. Title III directs the Secretary of State to renegotiate successful Trump policies, asylum cooperative agreements, and Remain in Mexico program with his diplomatic counterparts. Title IV fixes the disastrous Flores settlement that rewards illegal aliens who rent or buy children to pose as family units to avoid detention. Instead, it keeps legitimate families together as they await adjudication in their asylum claims. Title V requires that unaccompanied alien children be immediately and safely returned to their home country, as we already do for unaccompanied children from Mexico and Canada. Rather than trafficked, abandoned, and then exploited in our own country, it helps our government's role in child smuggling and trafficking, a role that is morally reprehensible. Title VI applies the same penalties for visa overstays as we currently do for illegal border crossings. Under current law, it is a misdemeanor to cross the border illegally, a felony to cross it repeatedly, and yet only a civil infraction to overstay your visa. Title VII ends the Biden administration's abuse of parole authority, abuses which circumvent immigration law. Parole is inherently a case-by-case review based on individual circumstances in which the rigors of the law are inappropriate. Parole by category isn't parole. It's a new law by fiat. Instead, such changes must be considered passed by Congress in a nation that respects the rule of law. Title VIII, finally, creates two grant programs. The first provides funding for states to construct or improve border barriers and border technology. The second reimburses states for money spent on law enforcement activities related to the border. H.R. 3602 will help end the border chaos and ensure respect for U.S. immigration laws. With that, sir, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I grant myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to this foolhardy attempt to pass for a second time one of the most draconian immigration bills this Congress has ever seen. This rehashing of H.R. 2 is a joke. They say that the definition of insanity is trying something over and over but expecting different results. Yet here we are, debating a bill once again that continues to have no chance of being enacted into law. We know that because H.R. 2 has been brought up and failed twice in the Senate, most recently garnering a mere 32 votes. This is nothing more than pure political theater. I truly don't know what it is that the Speaker wants us to suspend, the rules of the House or our disbelief. My Republican colleagues continue to show us that they are not interested in finding real solutions to tough issues. Let's be very clear about what this legislation would do. This bill serves as a wholesale ban on asylum and the end of parole. No one would be able to seek asylum in the United States if they crossed between ports of entry, or if they had or could have had even temporary status in a third country. The last time we considered this bill, Democrats offered a variety of amendments to exempt the most vulnerable from some of these requirements. This included those fleeing communist and totalitarian regimes and unaccompanied children. The majority was not willing to exempt children under a year old. When it comes to parole, Republicans were not willing to support codifying the vital Uniting for Ukraine parole program, which has aided over 100,000 Ukrainians fleeing Putin's unlawful invasion of Ukraine. This is not serious legislation. Given their slim margins, it is unclear that Republicans could even pass H.R. 2 in its entirety today. As such, the majority had to make some tweaks to the bill to try to convince any Republican holdouts that their marquee bill is a good idea. For example, this version removes H.R. 2's nationwide E-Verify mandate. If passed into law, this would have decimated our economy, especially our agriculture sector. Some Republicans previously voted no because of this provision. But removing this title appears to be doing little for the bill's prospects. Other Republicans, including the chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee, support this provision and have expressed concern over its removal. This whole exercise is a huge waste of our time. Not only does this bill not have the votes in the Senate, it probably does not even have the votes to pass the House today. In what appears to be an effort to gain the support of Mr. Roy, an early opponent of the Speaker's approach to the foreign aid package, the E-Verify section was replaced with a new grant program to reimburse states for, quote, enforcing immigration law, unquote. This is intended to reimburse the state of Texas for the money Governor Greg Abbott has spent defying our federal system with Operation Lone Star, even though numerous components of this operation have been ruled unlawful by the courts. If the hope was that this provision would earn the support of Mr. Roy, it seems to have failed, since we are only considering this bill under suspension because he and others wouldn't even support moving this bill out of the Rules Committee. So not only is this not serious legislation, this is not a serious process. And let's remember how we got here. After passing H.R. 2 in May of last year, Republicans spent the next 7 months saying that H.R. 2 was the only way to secure the border, even though they know that it cannot become law, having been so overwhelmingly rejected by the Senate. Then they insisted that the price of helping protect Ukraine against Russian aggression was enacting harsh border enforcement legislation. Senate Republicans even managed to convince some Democrats to agree to a border bill in the Senate, a bill that Minority Leader McConnell called the toughest border bill in 30 years. But Republicans could not take yes for an answer. Donald Trump said that he didn't want to do anything that might help at the border in an election year because he wants immigration as a campaign issue. Other Republicans said it out loud too, saying they don't want to, quote, do too damn much to help a Democrat, close quote. Folding to the cult of Donald Trump, and just hours after the 370-page text of this bill was released, Speaker Johnson declared the bill dead on arrival in the Senate, and that bill was released. Speaker Johnson declared the bill dead on arrival in the House, with the rest of the Republican conference quickly falling in line. Republicans showed clearly what Democrats have been saying over and over again, that they don't want to do anything that would help address our broken immigration system. They just want to talk tough, without doing the hard work of actually legislating. Now this version of H.R. 2 is being sent to the floor to give Republicans cover to vote for necessary aid for our allies, Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. If this political theater and show vote of this bill is what they need to pass vital aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, then fine. But let's not pretend we're accomplishing anything here today. This is a waste of our time. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Siscomani.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend from Alabama for yielding me time. I'm glad to see this body taking up my border security legislation today alongside these important other packages as well. Now, the gentleman from New York calls this a joke. Well, I don't know what he finds funny, but nothing about this situation is funny. It's not funny to our Border Patrol agents. It's not funny to my border communities. And it's certainly not funny to the hundreds of thousands of women and children being trafficked by the Mexican cartels in our southern border. There's nothing funny about this situation. Let's be clear. Our border is broken and has been for a long time. And at a time where our world is most dangerous than ever, and our adversaries are emboldened, protecting our homeland is our most critical priority. Attacks by our adversaries have spurred the urgent need to support our allies. Congress should be able and must do both. And it all starts with a secure border, Mr. Speaker. This bill takes major strides in addressing our porous border. It would immediately restart construction of the border wall, end the disastrous catch and release policies, and streamline the asylum process. We have seen policies that work, including Remain in Mexico and the silent cooperative agreements in the Northern Triangle. This bill would start the process of going back to those policies and in turn stem the flow we're seeing. The United States Congress is the most powerful body in the world. We must be able to support our allies while we protect our homeland as well. The world is looking to America for strength, and our country is looking to Washington for leadership. The administration is nowhere to be found, has been nowhere to be found. We must step up and fill the gaps the White House has left by their weakened foreign and domestic policies and stances. Since January of 2021, there have been more than 7.6 million migrant encounters in our southwestern border. In addition to this staggering 7.6 million, estimates suggest upwards of 1.8 additional illegal immigrants that evaded Border Patrol and entered our country. Most notably, 169 individuals on the terror watch list were apprehended at the border in FY23. These are no longer just families coming to America in search of a better life. In FY24 so far, we've witnessed over 20,000 Chinese nationals at the southwest border. Encounters of Chinese nationals have already surpassed all of last fiscal year. I recently went to Israel and personally walked through the devastation of October 7th. Make no mistake, Hamas wishes the same fate on Americans. This bill does not just address a major national security weakness, it solves a crisis that millions of Americans already live with. In my district alone, we have seen close to 1,000 migrants per day enter our communities. Arizonans have seen a spike in high-speed car chases and illicit activity by Mexican cartels. In FY 2023, fentanyl overdoses in the U.S. rose above 112,000. Fentanyl overdose deaths becoming the #1 cause of death among young people in my home county of Pima County. My colleagues from New York to Oregon have seen the effects of our border crisis in their own communities. We must send a signal that the U.S. southern border is not open. Our adversaries, whether it is the Mexican cartels or the CCP, will seize any moment to take advantage of American weakness. Each of these packages take a firm stance to stand with our allies in Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine. In turn, my bill takes a firm stance in American strength in our homeland. See, Mr. Speaker, this is personal to me. Not only is it the #1 issue in my district, and it's a #1 issue for Republicans and Democrats in my district as well, but I'm a first-generation American. I immigrated here with my family when I was a young boy. Today, the open border policies of the Biden administration are not the way of the American dream. It dilutes and diminishes the efforts and sacrifice of so many immigrants that came before us to open up the way, invest in this country, and became Americans. It is fueling human trafficking, enabling the cartels, and flooding our country with fentanyl and other deadly drugs. America is a land of opportunity. I believe that. I'm a proud product of the American dream, living it every single day, Mr. Speaker. But the crisis at our southern border is not the American dream. It's a nightmare. We must take steps to secure our southern border immediately. This legislation is a start. I urge my colleagues to vote yes. And with that, I yield.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Mississippi, Representative Thompson.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for New York for giving me the time. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this sideshow. Consideration of H.R. 3602 today is a cynical move meant to appease Republicans who refuse to provide aid to fight autocrats and terrorists unless they get to deport migrant kids first. These extreme MAGA Republicans care more about scoring political points than finding solutions and refuse to consider the bipartisan Senate Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Bill. They're having a hissy fit after the Senate threw out their unconstitutional articles of impeachment against Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. They care only about electing Donald Trump, and they are happy to rip up the Constitution, create chaos at the border, and prop up Vladimir Putin to do it. This is why they are insisting on rehashing this terrible bill, which had zero chance of passing the House, let alone the Senate. H.R. 3602 shifts all border processing to ports of entry without providing any additional resources. The bill doesn't fund a single new officer at ports of entry, where more than 90% of fentanyl is interdicted. Our ports of entry are already short over 4,000 officers. When the Homeland Security Committee considered a version of this bill last year, Democrats tried to add an additional 1,700 officers, but Republicans refused. Furthermore, this xenophobic bill would strip DHS funding from any community or religious organization that help migrants. It is so overly broad that organizations that place water in remote areas of the desert or provide a pregnant mother a safe place to sleep would be ineligible for DHS funding. This bill is so overreaching that it would force the American Red Cross, may I have an additional?
The gentleman, additional minute.
I thank the gentleman. This bill is so overreaching that it would force the American Red Cross to verify every person's immigration status before providing life-saving services following the natural disaster. This is just inhumane. Furthermore, H.R. 3602 is so poorly drafted that it would bar many U.S. citizens from boarding commercial flights. This bill sets requirements for forms of identification that can only be used through airport security, but the list doesn't include driver's license from Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, Guam, or other U.S. territories. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill is too extreme. It's just brought here today to appease certain elements of the party. Republicans must put an end to this chaos and dysfunction and get back to serious legislating. Vote no on this unworkable bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman, Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my good friend and chairman, Representative Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, a joke is what the Democrats called this bill a joke. It's not a joke to put back in place the policies that worked. In fact, I would call that common sense. Remember what happened on day one of the Biden administration? They said, we're going to get rid of the Remain in Mexico policy. We're going to stop building the wall. And when you get here, you will be released. Well, who the heck wouldn't come if that's the policy? And that's exactly what's happened. On pace to get to 12 million migrants entering the country in the Biden administration. So this bill fixes those things. It says we're going to build the wall, provide money to do so. We're going to go put back in place the Remain in Mexico policy, which worked. And we're going to end this catch and release. And guess what else it does? Guess what else it does? Changes the way they're doing parole. The very program this administration put in that allowed the individual to be released into the country who killed Laken Riley. That's not a joke. That is good policy. Policy that will help protect Americans. Policies that make common sense. So I appreciate the gentleman from Arizona for sponsoring this legislation, Mr. Moore for managing on the floor, and the Judiciary Committee who's worked on this, Republicans on the Judiciary Committee who've worked on this issue for a long time. This isn't quite H.R. 2, but it's close, and it's the policies that need to happen. Again, understand the magnitude of the problem. On pace to get to 12 million migrants coming in this country in a 4-year time span. That's what the Biden administration has given us. Everyone knows that's wrong. Everyone knows the policies they've done intentionally, deliberately, willfully on day one have been harmful to the country. Democrats know it, Republicans know it, independents know it, polling shows it all across the country. So let's take a step in the direction of fixing it and pass this legislation. I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee, Representative Jayapal.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to this cruel, unworkable, and inhumane modified version of the Republican border bill, H.R. 2. What is the point of this exercise? The majority could barely pass this legislation last year over bipartisan opposition, and now it's going to magically pass it in the House with a 2/3 majority? Give me a break. That's not what's happening here. They say that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them the first time. Well, the majority has shown us who they are on this issue over and over and over again. They consistently reject bipartisan solutions, including a bill that was drafted in the Senate by the second most conservative Republican senator, and yet the majority and Republicans in the House and the Senate decided to kill that bill. You know why? Because Donald Trump said, kill the bill because we want to keep immigration out there as an issue that doesn't get solved, doesn't have any solutions, but has some empty talking point messaging bills that continue to demonize immigrants and create xenophobia in a country that has depended on immigrants to build this country and continues to. Republicans have said it out loud over and over again. Don't want solutions, don't want to solve problems, just want to preserve the issue for the election. This bill is going nowhere. So let's just be clear about that. The situation at the border is directly linked to the fact that the legal immigration system has been left in chaos because it has not been modernized in 30 years to meet the needs of this country. Who has stopped that modernization? Republicans, over and over again. When the legal process is so backed up that it takes decades for legal residents to get their children into the country, when employers simply can't get the workers that they need to hire approved because there's a backlog of 2 million people who haven't been processed, or when we have so few immigration judges that asylum seekers wait for over 8 years to get their cases heard.
Speaker, I yield the gentlelady another 30 seconds.
When people wait, asylum seekers wait over 8 years to get their cases heard, then yeah, people turn to unscrupulous actors, including cartels, who promise them that they can get in by going to the border. The only people talking about the open border and encouraging people to come across the border are Republicans who continue to put that message out there. But are we looking for solutions, Mr. Speaker? No, we're here debating a bill that has no chance of becoming law and is an empty messaging bill that does absolutely nothing to reform our outdated immigration system. Let's get back to governing. I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to my friend from another border state, Texas, Mr. Roy.
Mr. Roy is recognized.
I thank my friend from Alabama. The gentlelady's right in part. And we're here for two reasons. Yeah, this bill will not become law. There's no question about that. And it will not become law for two reasons. The first reason is that our Democratic colleagues refuse to address the crisis at the border and in fact want to perpetuate it, encourage it, and cause more of it. The second reason it's not going to become law is because Republicans continue to campaign on securing the border and then refuse to use any leverage to actually secure the border. That's the reason. Those two reasons right there. That's why this will not become law. Let's be very clear with what we're dealing here right now. We know the numbers. We can talk about the numbers, the 7 million that have been released into the country, the 2 million plus gotaways, the extent to which we've had 1,000 pounds of fentanyl pouring across our border every month for the last 6 months, the 24,000 Chinese nationals, 85% of whom are adult, single individuals that have come across this border since October 1, which is more than the entirety of fiscal year 23. And certainly more than the 381 in the last year that the policies of President Trump were in place. The reality is we are being put in danger. The American people are getting killed. Laken Riley is dead because of the policies of the Biden administration, specifically the parole policies that release people into our country to kill Americans. That is what has been happening. And yet we're going to do nothing about it. We have legislation right now that would fix the problem in significant part. H.R. 2, we passed it a year ago. It is a great bill. I support the bill. I support what's in it. It changes the policies. Frankly, policies that President Obama and Jay Johnson asked us to change, like TVPRA and Flores. It changes the policies of abuse of parole and asylum by this administration. We should get it signed into law. But the only way to force Democrats to do it is to use leverage. And we're not going to. Despite the fact that the Speaker of the House repeatedly has said in January at the border, a trip I didn't take because I knew full well what would happen. It would be a show trip. And that's exactly the truth. If President Biden wants a supplemental spending bill focused on national security, it better begin with defending America's national security. We wanted to get the border closed and secured first. He said in a letter in December, supplemental Ukraine funding is dependent upon enactment of transformative change to our nation's border security laws. Well, here we are today with a sham vote. And let me be very clear. The people saying that we stopped H.R. 2 in the Rules Committee and didn't allow it to get connected to or get it to allow to be attached to the Ukraine bill, they are lying. That is not true. It was a separate rule, a separate vote designed as cover for Republicans to try to vote for a Ukraine funding bill without securing the border of the United States. And yes, I do agree with that point. That's the truth. I yield back.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from my home state of New York, Mr. Swazi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Swazi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Roy, the histrionics and the hyperbole are not working. You just said so yourself. It's not working. We're about to pass. It's not working. It's not working. The bottom line is...
The gentleman will suspend. House will be in order.
The bottom line is that we face issues that are very serious in our country, including the border. There's a crisis there. And we have to address it by doing what we're doing today and tomorrow related to the foreign aid bill. We got to work together. We have to find compromise. We have to find bipartisan solutions. Every problem we face in our country is complicated, and you cannot solve complicated problems in an environment of fear and anger. People have to sit down and work with each other. I know Mr. Moore is a very good man. There's a lot of good people on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side. Let's work together and solve these very serious issues we face in our country. We had a bipartisan solution by one of the most ethical, honest, hardworking, conservative Republicans in the United States Senate, James Lankford. And we didn't go forward with that bipartisan bill because President Trump and others said, we don't want to give Biden a victory. We want to campaign in the chaos.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman an additional minute.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. So they said, we don't want to go forward with that bill because we want to campaign on the chaos. We don't want to give a victory to the Democrats. It's not a victory for Biden or for the Democrats, for the United States of America. And for us to move forward as a country, we have got to work together. I see the people up here in the gallery today, people watch television, they read the newspaper, and they're sick of this. They don't want us fighting with each other. They don't want us with the histrionics and the hyperbole. They want us to sit down and negotiate a settlement. H.R. 2 was tried before. It didn't work. Let's say you get everything you want. Let's say Trump gets elected. Let's say that you win the House, you win the Senate. I don't want that to happen, obviously, but let's say you get everything you want. You won't get enough votes in the Senate. You'll still have to negotiate a bipartisan compromise. People have got to learn to get back to the basics of legislating and negotiating and working together to solve the problems that the people of America demand that we solve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. The members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair, and the chair would remind members that the rules do not allow references to persons in the gallery. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
I yield 1.5 minutes to our friend from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. You know, I will say this about my friend from New York, Mr. Nadler. He's right on some points, but he's wrong on some points as well. And one of them is this. This bill gives money to the states to deal with the calamity that has been caused by the Biden administration. So, years ago, when Janet Napolitano, who was in the Obama administration, in the same position that Secretary Mayorkas is in, she demanded that the federal government pay for the damages caused by illegal migration at that time. She understood, just like Katie Hobbs, who is the current Democrat governor of Arizona, says, we've got to have resources. Please understand that you don't understand what's going on the border. I will say one thing, my friend from New York is correct. This is a show vote. H.R. 2 has been sitting in the Senate. It should have passed. It would have taken care of 90% of the problems on the border. I know, I wrote most of those provisions, along with my friend Chip Roy. And I will tell you this, if we do not pass this, don't come to us if you're living in New York and say, we're in trouble, because you have perpetuated it. This is the time to pass this piece of legislation. The process has been crappy, but this is the time to pass this legislation because it has to be done. Yield.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my friend General Perry from Pennsylvania.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Duplicity. This is a lie. It's a deceit. It's trickery. It's chicanery, fraud. It is a swindle. It is a scam by design, Mr. Speaker. This is a pig in a poke. You don't even get the pig, though. You just get the bag. We told everybody we're going to do border security. We're going to attach it to this bill, and this is all going to go to the Senate, and then the president's going to sign it, but that's not going to happen. Border security is not in here. This is a separate bill designed to fail. Designed to fail. You're getting a box sent to you in the mail that says border security. If you're Laken Riley's parents, if you're Kate Steinle's parents, you're getting the box that says border security, and you open it up and there's nothing in it. You're supposed to believe we're doing something here, Mr. Speaker. But in reality, we're just tricking you and swindling the American people again. This is an abomination. I'm going to vote for the bill, but I want everybody to know it's a sham. I yield.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Yield 1 minute to our friend from Louisiana, Representative Scalise.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in strong support of this bill. But, Mr. Speaker, for years now, this House Republican majority, and before we were a majority, have been calling on President Biden to secure America's border. we have been trying to engage President Biden in a negotiation to fix the problem. We've put together legislation, and H.R. 2 has been mentioned by many, many people, the strongest border security bill that has passed Congress. And it's been over in the Senate since last year. And they continue to ignore it because they have chosen to ignore the problem. You saw it play out just days ago in the Senate when we sent over articles of impeachment for Secretary Mayorkas, who has failed miserably in his job of protecting America's homeland. That's his job. He is the Homeland Security Secretary, and you've seen him here on Capitol Hill testifying that our border's secure. It would be laughable if it wasn't so insulting to millions of Americans who know that's a lie. Our border's not secure, and in fact, since Joe Biden took office and took actions to open up our border, we've seen millions come across. Is it 8 million? Is it 10 million? The number we know is at least that high, if not higher. We know people on the terrorist watch list have come into our country because we've caught some of them, but we haven't caught all of them. We see thousands of Chinese nationals of military age coming into our country. Now, do you think they're coming in here to help be a part of the American dream or coming to undermine it? We know the answer to that question too, which is why we continue to press our colleagues on the other aisle, our colleagues in the Senate, and of course Joe Biden in the White House to get serious about this issue, but they refuse to. We're not going to let this go. We're going to continue to bring this up. Mr. Ciscomani brought this bill forward, and we will continue this debate. And if President Biden wants to ignore it, he knows, and the American people know, that President Biden has the legal authority today through executive action to secure the border because they watched him use that same executive action to open up the border. He ended Remain in Mexico, which we restore in this bill. He mandated catch and release on our Border Patrol agents who want to secure our border. You talk to them. We've embedded with them. So many of us have gone down the border and embedded with our Border Patrol agents, and Mr. Speaker, they will tell you what's wrong. And the things that are needed to fix and secure the border are in this bill, but President Biden doesn't want to fix it because he knows he can fix it with a pen today. He's chosen not to because the far left elements, the radical elements of his party want an open border. And they're clear about it. And the president tries to act like he wants to secure the border, but then when it comes time to actually negotiate, he's nowhere to be found. The voters ultimately of this country are going to have a say in November. Do they want a secure border or not? Because you've got a clear choice. When Donald Trump was president, we had a secure border, and he took those steps. Mexico didn't want Remain in Mexico to be the policy at the time. That was asylum, by the way, which is what we're really talking about. It was President Trump who went back to Mexico and said, either you're going to agree to this policy, it's a negotiation between two countries, or there's going to be consequences. And he laid out those consequences. Well, lo and behold, Mexico saw the light. Mexico recognized it made a lot more sense to agree to that policy with President Trump than to suffer the consequences. And so we got Remain in Mexico, and it started to solve the problem. And then he ended catch and release. He was building wall. We funded this when we were a Republican majority working with President Trump, funded construction of the wall, and hundreds of miles of wall were being built. Joe Biden comes in office, and on day one, he mandated the halt of that construction of that wall. The wall was working, and Joe Biden knows it, and he ended it because he wanted the border open. And so, step by step, action by action, Joe Biden's opened the border. He refuses to negotiate with us on fixing the problem. But we're not going to walk away from this. We're going to continue to force this issue, to bring votes to the floor, to press the Senate to take this up. But at the end of the day, if Joe Biden still wants to continue to block this, he still wants to continue to keep the border open, the voters are going to have the ultimate say in November. And I don't think he's going to like the answer. He could do something about it right now, and he refuses to. So ultimately, the people of this country will have a say if Joe Biden won't work with us, but we're going to continue to push it. I urge adoption of this piece of legislation that's so important to our national security, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I reserve, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the hypocrisy in this chamber is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mr. Scalise says H.R. 2 was sent to the Senate and the Senate ignores the issue. The Senate didn't ignore the issue. The Senate negotiated, as was mentioned before, a very, very tough immigration bill, the toughest ever, negotiated by Senator Langford, whose reputation is the second most conservative Republican in the Senate. But it didn't pass. Why? Because former President Trump said, don't pass anything. Don't pass H.R. 2. Don't pass the Senate bill. I want an issue. I don't want this issue solved. I don't want a solution. I want an issue for the campaign. That's what the president said. Congressman Nels got up and said the same thing. He said, why should we give a win to a Democrat? Unquote. So don't tell me that anyone is serious about H.R. 2. They're not. And H.R. 2 is so draconian the Senate would not give it more than 32 votes. We know that. We know that H.R. 2 is a fiction in the Senate. We know the Senate negotiated a very strong bill. But that bill could not advance because the president said he didn't want it. And the president, not this president, the former president, Trump, said he didn't want it. And he doesn't want anything to pass on this subject. So don't tell me that the Republicans want a strong immigration bill and the Democrats want open borders. Nobody wants open borders. And there's something else. The Republicans rightly decry the catch and release policy where someone claims asylum and is then released into the country for years till a trial date comes up to decide whether that asylum claim is valid and should be granted or whether the person should be deported. And that really is intolerable. But President Biden proposed a solution. The solution is very simple. He proposed an appropriation. I forget the amount, but an appropriation that would be sufficient so that those trials would be held in a matter of weeks, not years. So that if someone claimed asylum, he has a right to claim it, he has a right to an adjudication. The adjudication would take place in several weeks. And if the person's case was valid, asylum would be granted. And if the person's claim was not granted, he'd be swiftly deported. So you wouldn't have what they call this invasion. It's not an invasion. This country is composed of people who came from immigration. In 1900, there were 10,000 a day. And they created the current United States, probably the ancestors of most of the people in this country. Immigrants are not a curse. They're a blessing. And we need them for our economy. But we need a legal system. And the legal system can only occur if the adjudications can occur quickly. And the president proposed the means of doing that. And the Republicans rejected that. So they rejected that. They rejected H.R. They rejected the tough bill in the Senate because, as President Trump said, I don't want a solution. I want an issue for the campaign. I yield back. I reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson-Lynn.
Well, we know what we are here for.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Unanimous consent to speak to the House. So I wanted to say as much time as I might consume. But in any event, I thought we would come here today and have a reasoned opportunity to address this question. Let me be very clear. I've been in this body long enough to say that we have had a time where members have been here and we have had control of the border in the interpretation that my Republicans might say. We've had a flow of immigrants, we've had processes, and we've had challenges. And we've spoken to the issue of providing funding for these challenges. Here's what the issue is. The issue is that we have a past president who sees in his jurisdiction and career to block the flow of immigrants who are building and continue to work with us in working on this nation. They come from Ukraine, they may come from Israel, they may come from Palestine, they may come from Taiwan. Those individuals need...
Speaker, I yield the gentlelady an additional minute.
Ladies recognized for 1 minute.
Those individuals need processes and they need funding. We won't even give them war funding. And as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, I can tell you that the issue is that we're not bringing groups together who are fleeing persecution, which is what we're seeing in the individuals coming to the country now, fleeing persecution. We want to reject them. We want to reject the funding. When I was on Homeland Security, we did not do that. We provided for the NGOs. It is shameful for us to think that we can live in this country and reject the NGOs, the non-governmental entities who are helping those who are in need. That's how we did our work. And when we did our work, we would be able to solve the problems, and those problems would be helping NGOs. Those problems would be making sure that we gave dollars to the agencies like the Catholic Charities. Can anyone believe that we don't give money to the Catholic Charities anymore? And so the call that we have today, Mr. Speaker, and to my good friend, the whip of the House, working with our whip,
Ladies' time is expired.
Honorable Catherine
Ladies' time is expired.
Clark, is that we
Gentleman
need
from
to work
Alabama is
to
recognized.
help those who are most desperate and
Ladies-
most poor
Gentlelady's time
to
has
be able to
expired.
make a difference. We are not doing that, and we are rejecting the
Gentleman
mission
from
of
New
this
York.
nation, and that is to be able to help this nation. We're not doing that.
Gentleman from
We're
Alabama
only
is
whining and
recognized.
complaining. Let's get
prepared
to
to
work
close, and I
and
reserve.
pass a bill that will pass.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what you said?
Prepared to close, and we reserve.
Close.
Gentleman from New York is prepared to close, as is the gentleman from Alabama. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, if House Republicans were serious about addressing the situation at the border, they would work with Democrats on bipartisan legislation that could actually become law, as they did in the Senate. But time and again, Republicans have proven that they want the issue more than they want solutions. So here we are again, taking up virtually the same draconian bill as before, knowing that if it actually passes the House, it will surely go nowhere in the Senate. In a Congress that has broken records for its chaos, dysfunction, and lack of accomplishments, this debate is one more for the record books. I urge members to oppose this cruel and inhumane bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized to
Mr.
close.
Speaker, we had Sheriff Daniels in Judiciary a few months ago now, and he said he had never seen the border as secure as it was in 2018 and never as broken as it is today. Our colleagues across the aisle, they often want to set the building on fire and then fund the fire department. We have solutions to the problem on the southern border. We're not trying to make this a political issue. It is an issue of our time. The American people see it. And with that, sir, I'd urge passage of 3602, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3602 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Gentleman from New York. Does the gentleman request the yeas and nays?
I do indeed request the yeas and nays instead of a recorded vote.
The yeas and nays are duly requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor and congratulate my friend Dr. Kirk Calhoun on the announcement of his retirement. Dr. Calhoun has proudly served as the president of the University of Texas Health Science Center at Tyler since 2002 and as the president of the University of Texas at Tyler since 2020, making him the longest-serving active president in the UT system. Dr. Calhoun's leadership has led the UT Tyler system through tremendous growth and unification. Throughout his 22 years of public service, the institutions under his leadership have seen exponential growth, historic levels of giving to the community, and the launching of the first medical school in East Texas. He has helped to expand academic research programs, forge partnerships with the community colleges, increase student scholarship offerings, and develop a strategic plan for integrating the health and academic enterprises of our UT system. Dr. Calhoun leaves behind a legacy of excellence and service in our community. He is a hallmark in promoting collaboration and increasing educational opportunities, and this milestone is a testament to his dedication, leadership, and unwavering commitment to the East Texas medical and academic communities. Congratulations, Dr. Calhoun, on 22 years. You will be missed, but not forgotten. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 1 minute. Without objection. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Chula Vista Assistant Police Chief Phil Collum, a 29-year veteran of the department who sadly we lost to cancer. His service and his legacy will always be remembered. Those who knew Assistant Police Chief Collum best emphasize his empathy, his compassion, his reputation for being fair, his work ethic, and more than anything, his dedication to his community. Community was at the heart of everything Assistant Police Chief Collum did. He gave the directive in 2022 to create the Community Engagement Division to help foster community relationships, and he personally led this division. He was committed to building bridges between officers and the community they serve. Through the Community Engagement Division, he worked to make sure that Chula Vista Police Department was actively connecting with community members, including residents, students, and business owners. Under his leadership, the division also worked to make sure community members were aware of how officers could help them. Assistant Police Chief Collum was also deeply involved in charity work. He volunteered at his church. He went to Tijuana every month to support orphanages and to help children in need as part of the Corazón de la Vida Foundation. His empathy and his compassion for others was in full display. And the Assistant Police Chief was a true trailblazer. He was the first Chula Vista police officer who was black, his first black lieutenant, first black captain, and first black assistant chief. He was also the first openly gay male officer in the department. In his own words during an interview in 2022, Assistant Police Chief Collum was proud to be a member. We will remember him, and I thank you for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize April as Autism Acceptance Month. This April, we chose to celebrate differences that make us stronger. Today, millions of adults and an estimated 1 out of every 68 children in the United States has been diagnosed with some form of autism spectrum disorder. Notwithstanding these diagnoses, Americans with autism make exceptional contributions across our nation and around the world. Mr. Speaker, during Autism Acceptance Month, let us renew our commitment to support the entire international autism community, including children and adults with autism, their families, and caregivers. Together, we can increase access to information, encourage heightened understanding of autism, promote respect and dignity, and support the services that assist people with autism to reach their full potential. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to recognize Education and Sharing Day, where we honor the enduring legacy of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. The Rebbe was not only a spiritual leader, but also a beacon of hope and resilience. Escaping the horrors of Nazi Europe, he found refuge in our great nation, where he revitalized a community shattered by the Holocaust. Under his guidance, the Chabad Lubavitch movement flourished, advocating for education and moral integrity as the cornerstones of a just society. Chabad's vision is clear. Education is a fundamental pillar in cultivating a compassionate society. The work of Chabad groups across the country, and especially in Rockland and Westchester counties in New York, are critical. In today's tumultuous times, Chabad's message is more relevant than ever. We face a resurgence of anti-Semitism here in the United States, where we see playing out daily on college campuses. In response, we must recommit ourselves to fighting for dignity, honesty, and justice for all. As we approach the 30th anniversary of the Rebbe's passing, let's never cease working to create a nation that truly serves as a beacon of hope and freedom to the world. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from New York yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's with a heavy heart that I rise today to honor the life of former Hamilton County Auditor Bridget Kelly, who lost her battle with cancer on March 26, 2024. Bridget lived an incredible life of service. She was a true public servant who focused on improving the lives of Ohio families. She worked to bridge the partisan divides and make a difference for our citizens. First as a Norwood City Councilwoman, then as a state representative, and most recently as Hamilton County Auditor. While serving as representative, Bridget dedicated herself to easing the burdens of that young families face. In every role that she served, she did that. Bridget gave of herself to put constituents first, champion their needs, and attempt to ensure their lives could be made better. Her well-earned reputation of sincere civility was known and respected by all. My prayers go out to all who knew and loved Bridget. The Cincinnati community, the state of Ohio, and our nation mourn with her family and friends. May Bridget's memory continue to inspire us and future generations to serve our community with the same spirit of selfless service. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. For what purpose does the lady from Ohio seek recognition? Without objection, the lady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bills that will come before this House this weekend, especially tomorrow, and make our choices clear: liberty or tyranny, democracy or dictatorship, allies or enemies, resolve or accommodation, strength or surrender, rule of law, not rule of rogues, security, not vulnerability. As Daniel Webster's inspirational missive carved into the marble above this rostrum challenges, let us ask ourselves in our time and generation, may we not perform something worthy to be remembered? Yes, liberty first, last, and always. Through its historic fight against tyranny, Ukraine has reminded us how stark a choice the free world has. Ukraine inspires us to ascend into she wishes to ascend into the coalition of free nations sheltered by NATO's shield. Ukraine will grow to prosper in the European Union. Ukraine's warriors and people have inspired the world, and liberty demands this institution remain true to our nation's founding principles. Republicans and Democrats, Speaker Johnson and Leader Jeffries, all working together so the majority can work its will, not minority factions. Mr. Speaker, the middle has coalesced to meet Congress's first sworn duty to protect this nation from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will meet that obligation. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
To ask unanimous consent to address the House for up to 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks as I need.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize an incredible hero from my district. Earlier this month, an emergency unfolded in the town of Maysville, North Carolina, when a distressed driver rushed into the town hall seeking urgent assistance for his wife. Demetrius Jones, who serves as the finance officer in the town of Maysville, performed life-saving measures on the individual until the fire and EMS individuals could arrive upon the scene. As a physician, I understand the critical importance that acting swiftly
to intervene and preserve life. Demetrius' actions not only demonstrated extraordinary courage, but also saved the life of someone in need. Thank you, Demetrius, for your service to the community and exemplifying what it means to step up in the times of crisis and need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, time and again around this facility, we'll be in committee, we'll be having conversations, and what seems to be the biggest focus for a lot of the Democrats around here is climate change, climate change. And so I ask them, so what is the target here? What is the issue? It seems to boil down to carbon dioxide. And they never seem to know what the actual composition of our atmosphere is for the carbon dioxide we have. They don't know. Yet we have all these goals they want to set for how many electric cars we're going to have by what year, or what power plants, or getting rid of your leaf blower, or your barbecue, or this or that or the other. When it really boils down to CO2 is only 0.04% of our atmosphere. And it's very beneficial to plants. Without it, we would not have plants, and without plants, we would not have us. So the hypocrisy of people just trying to ratchet down CO2 and put our American economy in peril and export our economy, export our jobs to the Pacific Rim, to China, is going to be the result of this fallacy of the religion of climate change. I yield back.
Gentleman from California yields back. For what purpose does the lady from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the lady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so very much for your kindness. This is a very difficult time for members because we are talking about world issues. Tomorrow we'll be talking about world issues as well, and that is the final adjournment. If we do not do our work, the funding of the Ukraine money, the money for Indo-Pacific security, and the money for the struggling people that need the 21st century peace, and then, of course, Israel and the Palestinians. But this is the example. We can't get the southern border, but we can also not provide safety for our children, and these are children around the world. Where I fought for Russia to stop stealing Ukrainian children, we cannot do it without providing the funding, the war funding that we need, and we cannot do southern border protection, if you will, without understanding that it is not just war that you deal with at the southern border, you deal with human beings. And having been here for a period of time, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that we're dealing with immigration. Immigration is humanity. And so I ask the people that are here in this body to deal with humanity and to deal with our children. That means we'll get all the funding bills, and yes, we'll get the bills that will not make playgrounds war zones.
Lady's time has expired.
That's what we're doing. Let's save our children and save them now. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.